Clerk Hills, Member Morgan, President Perry.
Here.
Members Kelly and Melchusky are unable to attend today's meeting.
Thank you. Let's see. Kate, would you like to lead us in the pledge? Thank you.
Please stand. Place your right hand over your heart. Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, welcome. A quick reminder that tomorrow we have a meeting with Leadership Associates to discuss hiring a new superintendent, which is our top priority. And to clarify, this meeting is only to understand the process around potential curriculum changes under the law, and it is not to review current or proposed changes. That will occur at a future meeting when all members are present. This is also being recorded to improve transparency, to help parents and students better understand how this process works each year. A future board meeting will then use this foundation to discuss proposed changes from the advisory committee that met in January. If you are wondering why we are doing this, it is to begin to address the influx of calls we have had from many parents and students related to the posted 2025-2026 curriculum proposed. Parents and students have told us that they're confused, they want more insight, they wish to participate, and they want to understand what changes are being proposed and why. To be clear, we are only going to cover the process at this meeting. So if you have come to talk about curriculum specifically, this meeting is not going to address that. That will be a future meeting. This meeting is only a listening session to understand the process. On another front, as president of the board, I want to make everyone aware of a change we are instituting in structure. This is due to recent disruptive actions that have negatively impacted meeting decorum. Effective immediately, we are going back to our longstanding practice of limiting public comments to 3 minutes, but adding an optional 30-second extension to allow speakers to wrap up their point. The microphone will go dead at that point. Disruptive behavior in the meeting room will not be tolerated. And I have instructed our SRO to intercede and escort anyone doing this out of the room. Our current procedure is to have a presentation and then ask questions. If there are any students here that need to leave early, I would like to make a motion for an exception at this meeting so that students could speak first and then leave. Do I have any students that want to speak first? Okay, great. May I have a motion?
I move to allow students to speak prior to the presentation if they have to leave early, and then students speak first after the presentation. Thank you.
Okay. I'll second that. Okay, let's, Clerk Hills, let's start with our, Mr. Dixon, are there any changes to the agenda?
No changes.
Thank you. May I have a motion to adopt the agenda as presented?
So moved.
Thank you. Any discussion? Student board member provisional vote? All in favor? Aye. Motion carries 302. Thank you. Clerk Hills, can you start with students, please?
I'm not 100% certain that the please.
Does he need to leave early? Or does he want to hear the presentation?
Welcome.
Hello. Is my time start now? Okay. Hello, board members. My name is Logan Marshall. I'm a freshman at the Laguna Beach High School. I have now over the past 2 meetings attended and observed the past 2, and I wish to express some concerns that I have about them. Throughout these board meetings, I've witnessed, quite frankly, deplorable and embarrassing behavior directed towards union and student
Oh,
representatives.
Excuse me, this has to be about the subject of the process of the curriculum committee?
Yes,
Oh,
I'm
it
getting there.
is.
And I think that that overall attitude from the board kind of contributes to what has happened now, where we have 2 of the board members who have been previously educators are not present while talking about curriculum, and I just find that personally very odd as someone who has attended these meetings, because I think that their input would be very valuable, as do, I believe, many other parents. And I just was wondering if there could be an explanation as to why those 2 members are not in attendance. Thank you.
You. And, oops, this is being recorded so they can watch it, and it's just really a listening information session. We're not voting on any curriculum.
I understand. I just
Okay.
think that their input on the process would be very valuable.
I agree. Thank
Yeah, I think that's, Kamal is the other student.
So, Kamal, did you want to speak now?
Yes, please. Thank you. So, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kamal, and I'm a senior at the high school who plans to major in engineering in college. And I just wanted to share a student's perspective on the science curriculum at our school, but specifically the 2 years of required integrated science. So first, I want to acknowledge that our science department is amazing. We have outstanding teachers, classrooms, and a selection of advanced courses. I've personally had the pleasure of taking AP Physics and AP Chemistry, which have been 2 of my favorite classes. And I understand that we're adding AP Physics 2 and AP Environmental Science, which is really exciting to hear. But I think that the 2-year requirement of integrated science is limiting students' abilities to take full advantage of our amazing science classes. We offer 5 of these classes, yet students only have 2 years to take them because the first 2 years they're locked into integrated science. And I guess I could see the value in requiring that as a freshman, but after that, I truly believe that students would benefit from the flexibility of pursuing courses that align with their interests and goals and that will prepare them for college and beyond. But instead, students are forced to make tough choices. Some have to drop their language classes or their electives and double up on AP Science classes, which is just a really hard thing to do. And beyond that, some students I know have faced an issue with college admissions because for engineering, many programs require at least 1 year of chemistry and 1 year of physics, but integrated science doesn't fulfill those requirements for some schools. In fact, last year, we actually had a college admissions representative visit our school, and one of the students asked about those requirements, and one of our staff members mistakenly said that integrated science would fulfill that, but the admissions officer actually corrected them and said that it doesn't. And so that's a big problem that our students are facing, and I just think that our AP classes are too good to limit students into only having 2 years to take advantage of them. So I think that adjusting the curriculum to allow more flexibility would really benefit our students and allow them to prepare for their career and pursue their interests. Yeah, thank you for your time.
Kamal, can I ask you a question? Do you know what schools people are applying to that don't accept integrated science?
I think.
Any other students? Okay. Let's move on then to Dr. Mayberry, and we're so glad you're able to be here. Sorry that it was last minute, but thank you for changing your schedule. And we understood that maybe you couldn't come, and we were okay with somebody else presenting. But so you're going to present to us about the process, right?
So with a short notice, just want to be upfront, like staff has not created any formal presentation. We did gather, based off of the background information, we've gathered 8 documents that we think are related to the process. We heard and the item related to what's new course process or adoption process, what's the weighted, how does that work, right? So we have some documents related to that that we can share and go through. Is there a place that you want to start?
Out and then
Okay.
whether it's weighted or
Okay. Can you do the curriculum council adoption process document? And just we have we have the documents that she's pulling up. She'll pull up the adoption process one, but we have the high school course catalog, the ninth grade course selection sheet. We have a list of the weighted GPA courses between I think all the way back to 2016 to 2015 and how those have changed. We have BP board policy admin reg 521, which references how the weighted GPA alignment with UC honors designation, how that works, and that board item or board policy. And then we have the weighted grades board presentation from 2019. It was a review, and then I was able to find a weighted grades board presentation from February 2016, which started that or made that shift. So we're happy to go through those again. So this document here is our process for adopting new instructional materials and courses. So the general approach to that is that there's an identified need that often that comes from staff. We have an interest. Sometimes it comes from the state. Could be like personal finance is one that the state is coming up that they've said is going to have to be a graduation requirement. So we know that's coming up in the next few years. Sometimes there's interest from students. So we work through that. That's the initial process, some kind of identified need. The site, which is typically the high school, because they're the ones that have the most courses. Typically, they then do some research around that topic. They look and say, okay, what's the student interest? They survey some students. They don't do a school-wide survey or anything like that, but they talk to some students, get some interest. They might talk to parents. They look at the cost potentially to it. Is there a book that would need, or is there not? Does it fit into the master schedule? They might reach out to us or human resources and say, is there a person that has a credential to teach us? Could have a great course. We don't have a person that has a credential to teach it. We're also looking at, is there a cost to it that we need to be aware of that we may have or not have budgeted? So that usually takes a few months. That's usually probably a 2 or 3 month process. They then submit, from the school site. Once it's developed typically it's developed from an department. So let's say it's the math department or the science department. They work on that together. It gets signed off by them. The high school or middle school administration, they talk with them about it. They sign off on it. Then it gets submitted for curriculum council review. Curriculum council review, the last several years, as you know, Board Member Perry, is typically around the end of January, early February. And then there's a second one in April, sometimes early May. We don't always use both of those, but that is when we look at either new instructional materials or courses. We had one this year. I can give a couple examples on why they're in different places, but 2 years ago, some inquiries came up around work experience and mock trial. Those were in a spring one in April, so the course of study was approved after that meeting. Those were presented, and then we ended up not, as with anything, like we can approve a course, have the teacher for it, and if kids not enough student interest, it's not offered, right? So those cases, neither of those were offered that following year. When it's later in the year, the sites have to communicate out to the students in some way to say, hey, we've got this new course coming up. Are you interested? And see if they can get interest. It's obviously a little bit more challenging later in the year. If it's in the January timeline is where it's been for the last several years. And so that allows them to get it on the course requests as a potential option. So if it gets approved at the January one, the staff knows to let them know it's pending board approval. At that time, it's also pending UC approval. Like there's a whole process when a course is submitted to see if it is approved by UC with honors designation or without honors designation, just depends on the course. So that takes time. So those are both always pending. And their staff has been doing this for several years. They notify students and say, this is something we're potentially offering. They typically I would assume that we could ask Dr. Allman who's here, but like they would typically take some kind of backup or alternate choices. if needed, or if it doesn't go through, they might circle back to them. So like the last year, we had multicultural studies and data science. And as we know, multicultural studies is a state requirement, but that one had a lot more input into it because of the nature of the course, right? So there was a lot of updates to the board, a lot of input from a wide variety of groups in our local community and the surrounding communities to develop that course. That was eventually presented at the April board meeting along with data science, and then it was approved as a course of study. So those are those ones. This year, the meeting at the end of January, 3 additional AP courses were recommended by Curriculum Council. AP Physics 2, AP Pre-Calculus, and AP Environmental Science. So once it's going to approve the Curriculum Council, the next steps is they start to reach out to students and let, in that registration process, say this is a potential option, pending board approval, pending UC approval. And then we would be updating the board. Those 3 are pretty standard courses. Like the curriculum is determined by College Board. There's really not a lot of wiggle room with those. Like they are what they are. They have a AP test aligned with them. So, but those, depending on the nature of the course, there could be more obviously build up to it. But those ones, a lot of it's pretty much already set in an AP course. And then the reason those kind of fall in those, so the April meetings is set to catch anything that they might miss and before the end of the year. If something comes up, the January one allows it to start communicating it to families and students during the registration process. It could be moved to like September, earlier in the year. The challenge that the high school has found with that is that the courses have to be created way further in advance. So there's not that much flexibility for them versus like when it's in January, they're able to say, they have all fall to put something together. Hey, we're hearing this interest, let's check with kids. They've got the kids a little bit closer that might be taken the following year. If we did one in September, October was sooner, further back. There's advantages to that, being further out. There's also challenges into it for when it's being developed. It's got to be developed really far in advance, potentially almost 2 years in advance of being offered. So it wouldn't be as flexible for the staff. So currently, the last several years, it's been one near the end of January and one usually near the end of April. And then those are presented to the board to approve as a course of study, along with everything else that's been previously approved, right? So like this year, when we come to April, we'll have a list of courses that have already been approved by the board. I want to say at the high school, it's 100 and something courses, maybe 200 courses. And then there'll be 3 additional proposed ones at that time that would need board approval as a course of study. So that's the general process to it on a pretty simplified version of that. So.
No, I think we should do our questions. Yeah. So a question would be, how are members chosen for the curriculum council?
That's a good question. So there's a couple pieces of ed code related to that. Depending on the course and the curriculum, the majority of participants need to be teachers that would be teaching it. That depends on the curriculum, though. It's not every case. So the vast majority are typically teachers in there. But myself is in there as my role as assistant superintendent of instruction. Usually we have a director in there of special education that impacts those. We have someone, our ELD instructional coach, so they're getting from that lens. We have usually one of our counselors are typically, a couple counselors are typically there. Our career education coordinator is there. Librarians are typically there. They're sometimes dealing with the materials. Obviously, lots of teachers, especially impacted teachers. Like there was 2 science ones this year, so we made sure to have one of our elementary science teachers there, right? So and the middle school science teacher there, so they were aware of like this proposal and could give feedback on it and input. On the parent side, we asked the school sites to provide any parent to reach out to parents that are in elected positions to represent parents. So that's in general, that's PTA's elected, school site council, and then our DLAC, right? So you're typically polling parents from there to be a part of it. It's a pretty big group. I think we end up with, I want to say 30, 35 people in there. And so once the, and then if they're available, they would be at the one in April. I don't know, right now we have nothing scheduled for the April one. But if we would circle back, we do a save the date for all the invitees so that they're know that it could potentially have one in April.
That sounds like a really good group. Are there students involved?
I'm trying to remember if we had students there. I don't remember, Dr. Allman, here. I don't think this year we did not have any students there. I think we've had in the past, it's been on and off. They're generally more involved in the development process because the teachers who eventually are responsible for bringing it forward, because someone's going to end up teaching it, right? Or department is responsible for it. They are always getting student input along the way. One of the requirements to present to Curriculum Council is student input. So when you show the presentations, there's always a student survey, like, what do you like? Would you take this? What would you change about it? I don't believe we had students there this year, though.
There's a variety of points of contact for student involvement. Sometimes a student, I'll use an example of the development of one of our CCA courses that are now within the Bell schedule, are it falls under the umbrella of medical interest. And we had a group of students, this was about 5 years ago at this point, that presented and they took it on their own accord to get interest. And we established and worked with CCA to develop the course within the Bell that we now offer a number of sections. There's also like I'll use an example for science, the Physics 2, AP Physics 2 course. There are student surveys in the appropriate classes where students provide feedback. So Ms. Merritt, when she presented to Curriculum Council, also was able to share student feedback and anecdote in both anecdote, like qualitative information, but also quantitative information around student interest around a particular course. So that is the way that students are involved in the process. The students are typically not present in Curriculum Council. Just, I think, because of the time of day it occurs right now, that could be something to consider in the future.
Do you have a question, Board Member Morgan? No, I was going to call on you.
So if the curriculum interest is generated in the fall, typically if it's like a new class, or if there's desire for like an AP class to come forward, because I think it's great that we have AP Physics. I think it's the additions this year I think are fabulous. I think to speak to Kamal's point with the concern, I think we've kind of talked about it, this middle area, and I think this maybe it comes up in another presentation, but probably looking at just where we're offering the rigor in the middle level, because the whole honors path tends to give students the desire to try the rigor but not get to the AP level yet. And so I think that was one of the things that came out of that fall or the April survey of last year that was presented in the fall, that I know that's what's come to me a lot. And I know I've kind of mentioned it before too, is just this middle level of rigor, because when you look through like our science, it doesn't appear that we have equitable weighting opportunities or rigor in science versus English versus math. So I'm just wondering if maybe when we get to the weighting process, that might be something that comes up on how we're.
You mind if I respond from the site level?
Yeah.
So there's a couple questions that I think you asked there. One of which is, well, I'll cover the weighting piece first. I want to make sure that board is very clear that we operate at the site around the auspices of Board Policy 6000, right? Which really guides that piece of the curriculum. And that involves evaluating current education programs and courses that we have on campus, along with providing, listening to student feedback. We also obviously want to study admission trends, student interests, and the ability to offer a particular course. Because as a small high school, there are a number of courses that we don't offer, but we do often find alternatives for students to tap into. Like if I'm a very strong STEM student, I might be taking some of my coursework on the community college at the community college level as appropriate and as of interest for the student. It's not something we force students into, but we make sure that students and families know all the options that they have in front of them. Additionally, with I think you're talking about not necessarily the middle, but maybe like lower level access to AP courses. We've added that opportunity for rigor at the high school on a variety of fronts, not just in the sciences, but obviously with the AP Environmental Science course suggested and being offered to students pending board approval, in preparation for registration and getting that up and running. That will be another access point for students to be able to take. We also, I think it's important to note, over the time I've been there, we've increased our weighted course offerings from, I think when I arrived, we had 20-something. I can share with Jeff the actual number of weighted courses, but as we've evolved, this year we have over 50. So we have a lot of opportunities for access for students. And of course, we do talk about taking courses because you like the content and are interested, but we also have increased students' opportunity to take courses that actually are what we call in our school community weighted. So again, if you look at the kind of overview and concept and role of Board Policy 6000, that's where we really take into the heart the development of curriculum and course offerings for students. So.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Allman. Do we have a philosophy or do we have an overall philosophy about grade weighting? Are we moving into that next subject? Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry. I thought
If you want to
go
talk about
ahead. No, please
process,
do. No,
I just want
please
to
do.
make
Finish-
sure
finish.
you finish any questions about process. Any other questions about process?
Is this the time to provide like general comments, or is this questions only? Okay, then.
Okay. So the weighting, the high school operates off of Board Policy 5121, and AR 5121. So it references the methodology is in the administrative regulation, which is how we operate as staff. But the extra weighting applies only to courses that have been certified as honors. And we have this in that folder. You pull that one up. It's on the bottom of page 2 for the AR. The extra weighting applies only to courses that have been certified as honors courses by the University of California. So that was determined in 2015, 2016 by the board at that time. We have that presentation too. At that presentation too, that was, I think when it was before Dr. Allman, I think the principal prior to that presented along with Mrs. Messinger. And they presented to the school board to address there at that time, what I gathered from that presentation was they were addressing inconsistency in grade weighting practices across departments, the potential to artificially steer students towards certain subjects. They created an academic task force at that time, had a variety of stakeholders, and they recommended that the district's honors course, that level of rigor, be aligned with the UCs, right? Which is where the majority of our students go, is to a UC or a CSU. And so they aligned with that. So if a class is approved by UCs as a honors course, then it's approved, then it would get weighed at the high school.
Previously, there was always a board member on the curriculum committee. And so the board was made aware of any new classes that might be coming, not approving them, but made aware, because when the board member gave his or her report, that was reported. So not knowing anything about it until it's talked about in the spring doesn't give us much time to think about it or, look at reasons and what.
Yeah, that's a potential option. I don't recall a board member being in there since I've been in there, but I may not remember correctly, but I don't remember there being one in the last 5 or 6 years, but certainly could have a board member there. Typically what happens, though, I think I kind of mentioned this earlier, right? In the weekly updates, we'll provide something to the board. Here's what's going on. These courses were approved. So obviously we've had a lot going on the last several weeks, but our instructional services was going to add something soon related to the 3 AP courses that the Curriculum Council approved and at the end of January. Again, as I said earlier, if it's something more, more involvement by the community based on the course, like a multicultural studies, we're providing updates probably once a month on that development and what was going on, and this is going to the Curriculum Council. But with these AP courses in the past, we haven't done like a big update, a big formal update. So that is coming for you as an update on those, so that you have it well in advance of the April.
If I may share from my experience, I don't know what courses maybe were offered at lower level, maybe elementary in that process. But in my presence in Curriculum Council in my 9 years in the district, I have not seen, or I don't recall a board member being present, but I also-
I was there.
Sorry?
I was there.
Okay. I don't want to keep referencing Board Policy 6000, but under the roles and concepts of Board Policy 6000, I think item 2 reflects specifically that we involved staff, students, and parents in that process. And I feel like, of course, at the school site level, I know it's very different than operating at the district level, but at the school site level, that is what I feel my charge is, and that's what we've engaged in the process of developing courses. And as you know, like the courses we present, they're not, secretive in any way. That they're student and overall campus driven courses that we want to make sure that we're meeting the needs and interests of students. So, thank you.
Other questions?
I have a question. Is the curriculum committee, I'm looking back historically through our agendas back to 2018, I think I have in here. They typically always meet in January, and so they're focused on curriculum. Is it a standing meeting? Was it set up as a standing meeting and changed at some point, or is it an ad hoc meeting that reforms every year?
It's been around since I've been here. This is 7 years. And it's when you were adopting curriculum, which is right, the board is guiding and approving, right? And so you have to involve parent input, you have to involve student input, you have to involve staff. It's depending on, there's different levels of that depending on the course and the curriculum. So you'll always have every school, every district has some type of committee like this. Ours has typically fallen in January related to the registration process. And we've also had it, and obviously I said in April, and I believe there might have been 1 year where we had maybe our first year, there might have been one in like the fall.
I have a point of clarification too with Victoria is with us in spirit, and she sent me a text. So just she said it's not a board committee, so it's not an ad hoc committee. So she wanted to add that clarification. She said since it's not a board committee, the Curriculum Council, so it's not an ad hoc committee. That was. Yes, she's helping to support Jen and from beyond.
So is it something that if we set it up as a standing committee that we would then offer, and I don't think there's any question that our staff is highly talented in bringing forward really exciting curriculum at all. I mean, I think our staff is amazing. I think again, it's process. And so how do we bring more transparency to the process? And maybe it's just a fluke year in the fact that we haven't had anything. You had said usually we do, but we haven't had time yet. So is that something that because I do think some districts have it as a standing committee because it's an annual thing, and some maybe they handle it differently, but I know I've seen regular instances where the curriculum committee is a standing committee. Is that something that we could impose on, so that a board member could attend and maybe give reports back, so that there's a little bit more information, so that it's not that the board wouldn't forward someone to the staff if need be, but I think if some of them are just pretty general questions, having an awareness that something is coming is probably a good look for all of us, that board is informed of what's happening and staff, we're all communicating and working together. Is that something that would help, or is that, what is your thought on that?
Well, I mean, I would say, I'm not an expert in all the legal parameters related to school districts, but I think that'd be a good question for legal counsel to talk to, and then as a whole board decide, like, it says, do we want to have somebody there at those meetings, and this is the reason why. That may be a good topic for future discussion if we do a board workshop or something to make that adjustment.
Well, we have legal counsel here that can discuss the difference between the two, and perhaps we should make it a board-appointed committee. Could you address us, Mrs. Estrada?
Good evening, board, administration, community. I'm Amy Estrada. I'm an attorney for the district with Atkinson Andelson. As Board President Perry mentioned, I guess to explain the difference between a committee that's board created and administration created. I heard Mr. Conlon state that the curriculum committee is actually an administrative, not a board created committee. So there are Brown Act distinctions between those types, and an administratively created committee would only be able to act within the authority of administration. A board-created committee would be, unless it doesn't meet one of the elements, right? Either it's ad hoc and solely composed of board members. If it's not both of those things, then it's subject to the Brown Act. And then that could, if it was subject to the Brown Act, could carry out the functions of the board itself. I believe Dr. Mayberry said that eventually the curriculum and the courses do come before the board. So that would be a common practice. Did that add any clarification?
And another advantage of it being a board-appointed committee would be that any parent that was interested would be allowed to come, anybody in the public, right?
It would have to be open and public in the way that
Yeah.
a school board meeting is now. It doesn't mean that it becomes a town hall. It
Right,
would mean
right.
that it's a business meeting conducted in public is something we often say about the Brown Act.
Right.
So members of the public could observe. I would imagine it's all open sessions because I don't think there would be a reason for them to have a closed session. But they could give public comment to give input before, and you would have the same agenda and notice posting requirements if it was subject to the Brown Act. And I do have some districts that I work with that have, in particular with subject areas or curriculum areas that have been a little more controversial, have created their own subcommittees for curriculum and course development purposes that follow the Brown Act.
Thank you. I know in the past we've had a number of parents that wanted to attend, but it wasn't their a board committee, so they couldn't.
And those would be matters within the discretion of the local
Right,
agency, how
right.
you want to structure that.
Okay, thank you.
Just so, I may be the last person in the room that doesn't understand yet, but if there's an administration-created committee, they could invite, or they could constitute themselves to invite a board member to participate.
I have seen that in
Yeah.
some districts.
And if there's a board-created committee, they could invite somebody from the administration to sit on a board,
Correct.
and it wouldn't create the Brown Act issues either way.
If it's a board-created committee, it would need to follow the Brown Act.
Right.
Unless it met the very narrow exception.
Yeah,
There's
no,
only a narrow exception for if it's a committee solely composed of less than a minority of the board to serve an ad hoc or limited purpose. So an example might be if you had, I heard you're in a superintendent search, if you had designated 2 board members to be
Right.
a subcommittee for the purpose of a superintendent search, which is limited in time and scope, and you don't invite members of the public to be part of that committee, then the Brown Act would not apply.
Right.
But it's a very narrow exception, and in most cases, a board-created committee will have to follow the Brown Act.
Yeah, I was looking for symmetry, but there's no symmetry. It's asymmetric because it's the administration committee that doesn't, if it had one board member, wouldn't invoke Brown Act, but it's, once you get over on a board committee, you then are sunk. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, the law is not always comprehensible.
I know, yeah, thanks.
Any further questions?
Thank you. Could you just speak a little bit from the legal perspective of the board's role in curriculum?
Yeah, overall, the local curriculum decisions fall on the local agency, which acts through its governing board. But There are, as other speakers have noted tonight and in the presentation, there are provisions in the EERA, the bargaining law, that say that, certificated unions, for example, have a right to consult on curriculum. I think that might have been alluded to before. There are provisions in your board policy, 6,000 that I heard referenced, that does say you take input from your educators, your parents, your community, your students. And it sounds like those facets are in play, and I guess you just need to fine tune everything and make sure everyone understands the process.
But then the board ultimately needs to approve the curriculum.
Yes, and it was my understanding from Dr. Mayberry's presentation that you do, or the board does, at some point. And I guess the advance notice that you would like, I think, is subject to your direction.
Yeah.
But it sounds like the board has been at least involved in the final approval, or not, or disapproval, perhaps, of curriculum or courses. You're welcome.
Can I ask one more question? Sorry. Is it, if it's curriculum that a committee has, and an administrative committee has brought forward, and are we at any risk of exposure if we haven't, like legal exposure, if we're enrolling students in classes but they haven't been approved? I mean, is there a cart before the horse situation, or does it not matter? Is there no designation in the law on that?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know that there would be concepts like detrimental reliance, from students. I am not familiar with the case on that. It sounded like there were surveys that your administration puts out to get a sense of student interest, which I don't think would be synonymous with students actually committing to be enrolled in the course. I would think you have a lot of logistical issues, probably with your counselors or whoever's doing your master schedule. If courses were pulled out too soon before the school year, I think that could be a big operational fiasco, but not really a legal issue. So it wasn't clear to me if students are enrolling in the courses before board adoption.
If they are enrolling in classes before board adoption, what does that have?
Probably not a best practice, because you might have a lot of scrambling at the end if that didn't move forward.
Yeah, maybe Dr.
Yes.
Allman can kind of speak to us, because this happens every year. So like, let's say there's a course where 4 kids sign up for it, right? They register, they're putting course requests in March. I would like this course. Course changes are happening all the way up through the first week of school, right? And so they might say, look, we only have 4 kids. We're not able to offer that. What was let's go look at their second choice. If they don't have a second choice, they reach out to them and ask them. Or as you know, like there might be a scheduling conflict, right? Like the student has requested 2 courses that when the master schedule is all done, like there's a conflict, right? And then they go to the student, or if they already know their backup, they go to that and say, okay, looks like this didn't work. Let's put you in this other class. So it does that form of like requesting a course and not necessarily getting it, happens in some form every year. If you want.
If I may reference a couple things conceptually. First of all, I don't necessarily know if I appreciate the term like administrative, whatever it was called. No, I think we called it like a board-driven group or an administrative-driven group. I want to be clear that under the roles and concepts of Board Policy 6000, I've always looked at it in my 9 years on the high school campus that I am doing my diligence, executing the work around course offerings and curriculum development under Board Policy 6000, which again, item 2 references involves students, teachers, parents, and guardians in that process. To me, I've always conceptualized that as this was a established board policy that the board created, and I'm following it. So I also want to kind of highlight an example of where there would be more, I think you used the term transparency. I don't know if that's the right term, but there would be more communication in a sense, like as an example. I think Dr. Mayberry and I both can attest to the fact that we started conversations early and often around developing what is now the existing multicultural studies coursework. We had conversations with board and we got direction from board around that before we even presented to Curriculum Council, because of course that we all know that the kind of the environment that was creating among surrounding boards in our county, that we thought, wow, we should make sure that we are, having communication early and often around that. However, outside of that example, I would say that most of our curriculum council processes, course presentations and offerings have been put out to students prior to the formal board approval, because we're going through the registration process. And an example of that would be last year we attempted to offer a mock trial as a course. However, when we, as our attorney said, when we referenced course requests and built out the master schedule, we had to continue to offer it as a club this year because we could balance student interest, get them involved in that process, but we didn't have enough legs, so to speak, to offer it as a class. Obviously, with the 3 courses that we are proposing and offering to students during the registration process that's upcoming, you know, our AP Environmental Science, Physics 2, and AP Pre-Calc, we hope that, and already through preliminary kind of course requests, that those will be viable offerings for our students. So I don't know, I just want to make sure that you understood that concept.
No, I appreciate that. And I think, sorry, sometimes questions it's truly to understand and to understand the process. So if we have, if there's interest in a class and it's bordering on not getting enough enrollment, I think one of the comments that was made to me was, you know, how could, you know, if we had known this ahead, we might have been able to ask, you know, friends, hey, come take this class. Or so if is that, and you're right, it's a communication. Sometimes the words are sometimes interrelated, right? Communication or transparent. So when does the general population of students have that opportunity to bring their voice forward on a class that's being proposed, not just in the classroom, but on a broader sense, so that they can all, maybe it might trigger like, oh, that might be interesting to me, because sometimes we don't know what we don't know if we're in a narrower lane of either awareness or access to information. Or
I would love to defer to Carter and Kate on their experience around this, but a lot of it, fervor around course selection for students, happens during the registration process, where students see. So I think Dr. Mayberry referenced a sheet that has like your example of freshman course offerings. So I'm a freshman, I'm enrolling, I'm excited to go to high school. I see all the courses available that are offered to me at Laguna Beach High School. And a quick plug at the high school, I think we do a great job of offering a wide variety of courses for the enrollment of our size. I think coming from other districts, I think we do a remarkable job on that. And that's not because of me, that's just because of the environment that we're lucky enough to work in. So a lot of that consultation happens both, I mean, I would think it's fair to say as groups, like, you know, I'm a junior, I'm consulting with some of my peers that I respect and that I feel are on the similar academic trajectory than I am. I'm gonna consult with them and talk, because our students have reported that they get a lot of pressure and advice and guidance from their peers, but also they are always able and willing to consult counselors both individually and in group settings during that registration process. Our counselors have a variety of touch points with students. So the first touch point in the registration process is that they get, hey, Carter, you're gonna be a senior next year. Here are all the courses available for you. Here's what you've taken. Here's your 4-year plan. Here's where you said you wanted, here's what you said you wanted to take back when you were a sophomore for your senior year, or back when you were a junior for next year. Then they have their kind of consultations with teachers. They probably talk to their parents, and then they come back. We get their course requests back, and then that's when we are able to solidify, yes, they can be here, or as Dr. Mayberry referenced previously, there may be a conflict because you want to order everything off the menu and you have to pick and choose something. So there's a lot of touch points for consultation, both from counselor to student, but also counselor parent student in their like, you know, junior conference, parent conference that we have at all the grade levels. So there's a variety of opportunities for that. So.
Yeah, if I just may add, I think my understanding of what's going on like currently, I think we're talking like what's going on right now, is that counselors, you know, I have a brother who's a younger grade, all the water polo kids keep me, you know, what's going on and things like that, is that counselors were presenting courses in the last like week and a half, basically, and I think and I think to the point that you're kind of trying to make is like there were some changes to some of like the weighting and things like that that were like, I mean, I think it's my understanding this has been in the works for a while, like the reweighting of like the Spanish classes and things like that. Like Garvey told me that's been, I think they've been working on this for a couple of years now. But I think like that was the reason why like there was some like what's going on with that is like is there waiting and what's the reasoning behind that? But I'm sure there's a lot of like ed code and stuff like that. I know Ms. Quigley was telling me there's like the reason they're changing around they're adding pre-calculus and they're changing things around is because it's like very specific ed code requirements, and so I don't personally understand it all. But I think the point is that they get a sheet like, okay, all these courses. I think when we're talking about like the new courses that haven't been board approved yet, those are, from my understanding, those are still presented to students. So like the AP Environmental Science, like that's still presented as a valid course offering for the next year. I think I don't think I doubt there's ever been a situation where like the board has failed to approve a course like a bunch of students are enrolled in. I'm assuming, I don't know the history here of the board, but I mean, and so I think like that's kind of how it's going. So I think there's after looking closer, I think there's like an asterisk that says pending board approval or something like that next to the courses, which is I think important to note. But I guess like, and I have some other comments, but I'll say those for later about the science stuff. But that's kind of my understanding of where we're at right now. And Kate's welcome to add if she doesn't know.
Yeah, I'll just share a little of my experience. So I think in my science, my math, my Spanish classes about a month ago, I had a presentation about the available classes I had and what it looks like for me in like the next year. And then I also, since I'm a junior, I have an hour conference with my parents and my counselor, and we talk about my course selection for senior year. And then also today we had, in my history class, we had a presentation from one of the counselors about our course selection. So you get like a sheet with all your courses, and you kind of already know because you've had all these talks with your parents and your counselors. But yeah, for AP Environmental Science, AP Pre-Calc, and AP Physics 2, they were like, he mentioned to us that they're still pending board approval, but we had the option to choose those courses.
Thank you.
And I'll just add, there's a class that, no offense, Scott, I love your classes, but the class that I think every kid should take, I would love to see every kid take, is Authentic Exploratory Research. You hear it called AER frequently. So you think of like kids that like, oh, I have an interest in this, and there's just not enough students, right? There's 3 students interested in this very specific topic, or we don't have the teacher with the credential to it. It's a research-based, there's only a couple high schools we know that even have it. And it's a research-based class. They literally pick the topic they want to study for that year, right? So a student can pick anything they want. You pick your favorite thing. It can be, I want to figure out how schools are built and what's the financing behind them. That would be their research, and they would study that. They get a mentor. They potentially go visit different sites. It's a wonderful class that not only do we offer more courses than typically high schools that are 3 or 4 times our size, is we also offer a class that they can literally pick any topic they want to study. And so I would highly recommend that to anybody who has a unique interest. It's a wonderful course, and it's hybrid, so it's a lot of flexibility in your scheduling around that. So we make it work for the students to choose their specific topic. So there's typically not a master schedule challenge on that one.
Is that class offered at a certain time of the day? Is it like a specific period if it's flexible, or is it throughout? Is it just whenever it
I'm in the
works for
class right now. Yeah, Kate and I are actually both in the class. It's right now. It's historically been second period, so it's been second period. So we meet Tuesday, Thursday. But the way it works is that you don't meet like every day of the week. The way they do this, like you have a small group meeting sometimes with just a teacher and maybe your mentor and like a couple other students who have a very similar project to yours. And just go on Dr. Mayberry's points. It's one of those classes where it's like it's kind of catch-all. It's like whatever you're interested in, like you could everyone. And I think and like the past years, like some kids are still learning like what is AER. But like a lot of you guys might not know like what is AER, Authentic Exploratory Research. And like, I know they're working really hard to kind of promote it more because this year, if you guys go to the 8th grade family parent night this year, it's gonna be like the video they show like a video and they're gonna have that. We also have a symposium. This is my second year in the class. They have a symposium at the end of each year, so it's just every board member go. It's amazing. It's like a college symposium. They have these boards up, and you present all week during tutorial, and there's a final presentation at nighttime. And like for me, for example, my mentor is a historian, Dr. Malarski, and you get to work with. It's so awesome. You get to work with exactly what you're interested in, and so it's one of the great classes. It's kind of a catch-all.
Is that a Is that a class that does that have to be A through G approved, or does it depend on what they're studying, or how is that?
It's A through G approved. It's not an honors course. There's no honors weight to it.
Okay. Can we move on to weighting? Because I do have a couple questions about grade weighting as well. Would that be all right?
Sure. I think we went over it a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
So a couple of the classes that I noticed this year have changed their weighting. I think one of them that showed, because I went through as well and kind of looked at the curriculum. And so just for an example, like the Spanish honors was mentioned. It's pending this year for approval or for weighting?
For weighting.
For weighting. So what happens to the students that have taken, and I know like AP Algebra 2 honors is not weighted, but it was weighted last year, correct?
Right.
So what, in a situation like that, what is the policy or what's our philosophy on how that impacts students that have already taken the class and maybe gotten the weighted grade, and students that are coming into the class but now aren't going to get the weighted grade? And like college, I know if you enroll for 2025, then whatever your standards are for that at that time is what you hold on to through the 4 years of your college or whatever it takes. How does that work here? And how does that impact our students when we change the weighting from one year to the next?
So if the Algebra 2 honors, which UC is no longer recognizing as a weighted course, or as a weighted course, as an honors course, which means it wouldn't be weighted for us. Any students that's in it now would get the weight, right? It's going forward. They would not. So whoever would take it next year would not get the GPA weight. Correct.
Would it be changed for students who already took it?
No.
Okay.
Just ask why it was unweighted, because I mean, it's a pretty rigorous class. I'm just curious on why it's unrated.
I'd have to get back to you on the exact language in UCs, but in general, the UCs have shifted how they look at the course as they're looking at if you're within the first 3 years of courses that lead up to it, so they're counting it as a third year. They're no longer giving honors to it, and so, yeah. So the high school is looking at ways to potentially resubmit it. Our Algebra 2 honors course is a little unique in that there's pre-calculus standards. Almost every other high school, you go from Algebra 2 honors to pre-calc honors to calculus. We don't have pre-calculus. As part of the math adoption, before I was here 8 years ago, they removed it. They took those standards and integrated them into mostly Algebra 2, some into geometry and algebra. What that allows students to do is if they are they're passionate about math and science, they can accelerate faster than anywhere around us. So their students go right from Algebra 2 honors into calculus. I don't know of other high schools that do it. I'm sure there are. I don't know of any. But it really gives our kids a chance to accelerate if they're really passionate about that. So the high school's looking at, this is happening all kind of in live time. But we're looking at ways to help them. Hopefully they'll be able to see it as, hey, this is a little different than your typical Algebra 2 honors course. And here's why. So we'll see. But that's a progress. I don't know. Do you want to add anything to that or capture all that?
I don't want to speak out of turn here, but I also want to make sure that we understand that when we talk about weighting, I think we're talking about it as a parent with 3 kids in college currently. I think we're also talking about this as a form of maybe comfort, so that when we have our students navigate their high school experience and we get them in those weighted classes, we can feel better about a more robust GPA. But we have to be mindful, and maybe this is kind of a conversation at a later time, but we have to be mindful of what colleges and the admissions process do with the weighted GPAs that students apply to their colleges with, and they basically strip those down. You also want to make sure that you understand the surrounding practices of our other area school districts. As an example, Newport Mesa, Saddleback Valley, Capistrano Unified, they all use a decile system, right? They do not individually rank student GPAs for their graduating classes. So they have the decile systems where kids are in the top 10%, next 10%, and so on and so forth. There is a lot, I think, Sherry, I know you've heard me say this in our parent meetings on the school site, But I want to acknowledge that we send families and students off into a really dysfunctional college admissions process. And what we try to do is make sure, obviously with the course offerings that we have, we try to make sure that students do have a consistent opportunity for rigor. And this is where I want to highlight what I promised you earlier, which is the specific numbers. In 16-17, we had 26 weighted courses offered at Laguna Beach High School. 5 years after that, in 2021, we had 42. This year, we currently have 52 weighted courses offered. That doesn't account for the 3 pending courses that are going to be on our list for next year. So we have a lot of opportunity for students and families when they do consider the registration process to really have consistent rigor throughout their high school career. You can do your own research on what colleges do with our GPA when the student goes and applies, but they basically really strip those down so that they have a competitive candidate from Laguna Beach High School comparable to a competitive candidate from Catella High School and Anaheim Union High School District, so that they can make their best decision on their admissions and enrollment. So I just want to make sure that there's a bigger, when we talk about weight, there's a bigger concept that goes along with that for our students and the families to consider.
Yeah. And I think, Dr. Alleman, since there have been changes, I know one of our neighboring districts, the board members just had an 8-hour seminar where they talked and discussed weighting, and they discussed new courses. So things are changing in other districts, so maybe we look at that too.
Definitely agree. I wanted to, like, I use current practice of surrounding districts to help us and guide our conversations and work, but respectfully, Board Member Perry, I'm only keeping up with our board actions and activities, no one else right now. Thank you.
Yeah, is it possible that we could have kind of a dual situation where we're weighting grades, where our weighting, how we approach weighting our classes might follow the UC system and Cal State system? But I guess it's a two-part question. First of all, what is the percentage of students that we have that goes to the UCs and the Cal States? Because then obviously how we're weighting our classes is going to be equitable to the school next door. But if they're going out of state, I know that universities out of state look at our weights, look at students and their grades a little bit differently, and each one's a little different. Private schools are a little different. So if we have some classes that are honors that because of the rigor, while UCs and Cal State systems may not accept the grade weight, other school systems are weighting these honors courses, and so are we putting our students actually at a disadvantage from the equitability standpoint of not weighting the same classes from our curriculum offerings to a school district in the neighboring area because they don't always, I mean, they'll look at each student, but for us to assume that they're going to take an enrollment application of 5,000 students and say we're going to look at each one and see, whose grades we have to strip down and whose we have to inflate and who's, because of their weighted or unweighted, it kind of, I mean, we submit a weighted curriculum GPA and an unweighted, but sometimes it's even within that, it's the class specifically, like Spanish 4, or we have quite a few honors classes that actually aren't weighted comparatively to others. So I'm just curious if we're actually, in our effort to be equitable in the UC system, are we putting our students at a disadvantage when they are looking outside of our state compared to other schools?
I would just like to share a simple answer to that, which is why I've kind of shared regularly. I've given you a snapshot of a data set around the amount of weighted courses we offer, because I don't necessarily, my personal opinion is it's not about the specific course, whether we weight or not. It's how many opportunities does a student have to exhibit their academic rigor to a prospective institution. And I think, I don't want to challenge anybody here, but I think if you like kind of cross compare the amount of weighted courses we have at 52 this year to any of our surrounding high schools, I don't know the numbers, but I would say that we are really doing a good job of providing our students with, if they so choose, the opportunity to have a lot of weighted courses in their high school career.
Are the weighted courses including the CTE pathways? Because I know we have quite a few in that as well. So in that 50, in that count of 50, we're including the CTE classes. So those
Yeah,
aren't 50 that are offered here per se. It's just collectively
most
what's
of 'em are.
available to them.
Most of them are offered here out of that 52. I don't know the exact number. I could get that for you, but the vast majority are offered here. Yeah.
It would just help to know where they can access, because we want to encourage students to pursue their interests, but we don't, and not chase the GPA. But at the same time, if ACTs and SATs are still optional in situations, then we want to make sure we're putting our students in the best position that's equitable to nearby areas.
Well, and I think that's the challenge, right? Because colleges look at, depending on the college, 13, 14, 15 different factors. GPA is one of them, right? And one of the things that makes this place very special is it really looks at we look at the whole child, right? And that is a want from the community, so kids have a balanced approach to it. If a kid applies somewhere and has a 4.12 and the next kid has a 4.15, admissions does not care, right? You're not going to make or break your admissions based on 3/10 of a point or 3/100ths of a point. They're looking. I've talked to professors at Stanford, and they'll say our entrance freshman class could all be people 4.5 and above, if they wanted it. They have that many people who apply, but they don't want that. They want balanced students. They want kids that are interested in engineering. They need a trombone player for their band. They need a football player. Looking for all kinds of things. They're looking for a well-rounded class, right? So the GPA is one factor they look at, but they're looking at what I think Dr. Allman talked about is like students finding their passion, right? If you want to look at like CTE classes, dual enrollment classes, those are really highly valued by admissions now, right? An AER class is huge. So you guys are in a great spot for your college applications. So like those are showing, like they're literally doing research that colleges want kids to do when they go to research, and they're doing it in high school, right? So those are the types of things that they're looking at. It's challenging when you look at, do we adjust our honors policy to, a private school in Colorado that one student goes to one time over 10 years, right? So like the board's thinking, I'm assuming long ago, was like, let's get a common standard that's accepted in our state where a large amount of our kids go. We know that it's rigorous. They're approving it as rigorous. And then we've obviously grown from that to say, here's all these other opportunities, because it is just one thing that represents our kids. And even at that level, it's not always the best representative of the kids. We can have kids that have a 2, 3 that is going to change the world, right? And so making that whole child and that well-rounded student is what I think the high school clearly prioritizes and does a wonderful job at.
I think we're really lucky. Our high school offers so many classes for being small, and the weighting of so many classes. When we went to the system looking at Cal State and UC schools, we had a majority of our kids going there. When I looked last year, it wasn't the same majority that it had been before. There were many more going to community college, which is great, and many going out of state or to private schools. So that's changed a bit. And I know when I looked into this before, the weighting and unweighting, it wasn't just for getting admissions into college, it was about scholarships. And I called some of the schools, and they said that they have quite a staff to look at admissions. They don't have as many people for scholarships, and they do kind of cutoffs there. Okay, everybody at a 4.0 will look at or above, but not below, or things like that. So I was worried that we were leaving our kids out of perhaps getting scholarships. I don't know, but it might be times have changed since we came up with that. It might just be worth looking at it again.
And I would just add, I mean, obviously, anything we can go back and look at. I would emphasize again, like this is one factor that colleges look at. And then you're right. Like there are scholarships that sometimes depend on it different ways, and it's hard to we're not going to make a approach that works for all kids. We make that change, it's going to impact somebody else in a different way, right? But I'd emphasize like the research that you referenced earlier around the alumni. Like one of the most common things they say is They did not like, and looking back on their time in the high school, or recent alumni, like, they did not like the ranking system. They did not like the chasing of grades. They felt like they had to do it because all the other people around them were doing it, and they wanted to do things around their interests, which is what we do offer, right? So it's not, I mean, there's not gonna be a perfect system to, you know, but we're always is looking and evaluating, like, are there other opportunities to help our kids go where they want to go and what they're most interested in, and where's that right fit for college or non-college, right?
Any more questions? Okay, should we go to public comment?
Monica Golden.
Hi, I have a whole prepared thing to say, but I wanted to talk about a couple of points that were brought up. Dee did make a good point about the scholarships and the grade weighting. Having had 3 kids graduate and go to college, private colleges outside of the state, they definitely take the face value of the weighted grade, and that does disservice our students when they're not weighting some of these courses that could be weighted. And then the concept that we follow the UC grade weighting standards is not correct, because Honors Spanish 4 was eligible for weight by the UCs, and our high school just chose not to weight it for at least in 2019. I want to thank the board for having this special meeting to allow courses for the next year at LBHS to be presented. With registration forms already distributed to students and decisions being discussed and made by students for enrollment soon, it is important for the parents, the community, and the board to also understand what changes have been made, including introductions of new courses such as the ones we've already talked about, that can change the math pathway for students. Courses that are being retired, such as Honors Spanish 5, which can also change the language pathways for students. And courses, the science courses we have already talked about, which can change the science pathways for students. In addition, the weighting of a few honors courses have been changed, as we've talked about. And there has been no communication to the parents of these important changes. I've spoken with many parents who were surprised about these changes without any communication. The students were given a worksheet to bring home, which listed the courses and links to the course catalog, but this seems very late in the process to just be listing the courses and changes in the grade weighting without any explanation of how the new courses correlate to the language, math, or science pathways and the decisions behind the changings of the grade weighting. Back in 2019, when Honors Algebra 2 and Honors 10 were given weight, there was a board presentation on grade weighting, community input, and a board vote. And so far, that's not been done with any of these grade weighting changes. I'm also wondering what the procedure and timeline is for the new courses, which we've already gone over, so I'll skip all of that, which is great. I'm asking how students and parents can be more involved in curriculum decisions, whether that be more surveys that come to the community as a grader, not just the students, and some way of capturing interest in courses, and interest in how the courses are weighted. I'm asking that the new courses be presented to students and parents with enough time to make informed decisions on any new pathways these new courses could create, and they should be clearly communicated with enough lead time for parents to discuss with students with their teachers and counselors. If the curriculum committee meets in January, couldn't the curriculum be presented at the February board meeting so that there's time to understand the curriculum or grade weighting changes and allow opportunity for the community, students, and parents before registration? Doing it after registration really doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Thank you for your time, and thank you for bringing this.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Monica.
Shaheen Sheikh Sadal.
Hi, my name is Shaheen Sheikh Sadal. I'm a parent of 2 kiddos here in Laguna Beach. Actually, I just wanted to take a moment and thank the staff for being here today on a moment's notice and doing such a wonderful job with the curriculum. And thank you for taking us through this process. And to Dr. Alleman and his staff at the high school have done such an amazing job with thinking so thoughtfully about the curriculum and what's good for our kids and what helps them become well-rounded whole students. So I just wanted to say thank you very much from all of us on here and the parents. Thank you.
Thank you.
I wanted to make a comment. Can I make a? Yeah.
Are there any more, Mr. Hills? So we'll move on
that's-
to discussion if that's the last one. Oh, there are a couple.
I'm short, excuse me. My name's Tamar Darwish. I have a son who's a freshman at the high school, and he receives special education services, and he's very interested in STEM. I was wondering, and I spoke to the counselor about him taking AP Chemistry next year, and I was advised he would
Sorry,
not
could
be
you-
eligible.
Could you get closer to the microphone? So,
I need to go tippy-toe. There we go. Okay, there we go. So I spoke to his counselor about his options for advanced classes in sciences. And I was advised that that's not possible on the current track, that he has to do Integrated Science 1 and 2. And Integrated Science 2 honors is quite challenging. And this past year, a lot of students have dropped out because it became so challenging. And so my question is, are you going to be offering Integrated Science Honors 1? And if not, what are you going to be doing to help bridge the gap in the knowledge between Integrated Science 1 and Integrated Science 2 for students who decide to take that?
Good question. We'll have someone get back to you. Thank you.
Hello, thank you. My name is Janet. I have two kiddos. One is an 8th grader and one is a sophomore in high school. I want to thank the teachers and the staff. You guys do a fabulous job. Just in listening to all of this conversation and discussion regarding the weighting, I think one topic that hasn't been brought up by the teachers and maybe is not something that's at the forefront is when we decrease the weight of an honors class, I do think that there's a psychological component we have to think of with these kids. Because the motivation, of course you want your kids to take classes that they're interested in, but having kids take in some of these, integrated honors science and the honors algebra 2, these are really hard classes, and the kids are having to work much harder in these classes than their peers are who are in the regular classes. And I don't think that they're doing it only because of the weight, but having the weight is almost like it's a benefit, it's a reward. And so when you have kids who are applying to universities all over the country, they're applying for scholarships, they're applying for merit, they're applying for small schools, big schools, and they're competing against kids from the entire country. And kids, we used to live in Arizona, where the classes at the high schools with the kids that they're competing against to get into these schools are weighted, and they're taking honors classes, they're working harder. Just because these classes are not necessarily weighted in the California school systems, I think it's a disservice emotionally for these kids, because it just doesn't seem fair for them to work harder, have to do more homework, have to take more difficult tests, and at the end of the day, get a grade that maybe actually is a disservice to them because they get a B and the weight is lower than if they had taken an easier class and gotten an A and probably done less work for that A than they were doing for that B. So I just think that that's something that when we think about these things, and obviously there's a lot that goes into these decisions. I don't pretend to know it or understand it, but as a parent, I do see that, and that is something that I've heard the kiddos talking about, regularly amongst themselves, and I overhear it in the car when I'm talking, driving carpool, and I see them, and I do hear the conversations going, well, there's no point in taking that class next year because it's not going to be weighted, and it's just, there's no point. I'm going to have to do all the work, and I'm not going to get any benefit from it, so to speak. So I just hope that that's something you guys can consider when you guys are making these decisions. And again, I do appreciate your comment about the scholarships. That's a very real and I've sat on interview committees for university that I'm an alumni of, and we do look at, sometimes when you have 50 amazing candidates, it does come down to the GPA because there's only so many hours in the day to make those decisions. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hi, Danielle Rodersheimer. I have one in college and one still at the high school. So I wasn't planning on speaking today, but since I've been through the college process already, and I've worked with both our lovely counselors on campus, but also a private counselor that we hired. So first off, every school calculates their own GPA. They will strip everything down and start from scratch to calculate it. So they're not going to just get what's on the transcript that we calculated as a high school. They're going to figure it out how they handle weighting. So everybody's different. UCs are different. Private schools are different. We've been through all that. Also, when they're considering scholarship opportunities, they're going to go with a GPA that's calculated by their university. And sometimes how scholarships are given out that are merit-based, it's how do we want to build our profile? So for example, I have a daughter that's in Maryland. She very rarely bumps into anybody from the West Coast at all, like a handful of people like from Washington and California. She got offered merit because they wanted her to come there. So that they use that as an incentive to get kids from California into places where we don't necessarily have a lot of representation. So they will, like, yes, they're going to be looking, are you a cutoff at like 3.5 for merit or wherever they're 3.0? But it's not going to come down to, did you get a weighted grade for your Spanish honors or your English honors? So that they've been doing this for a while and they do it for lots of kiddos, so they calculate their own. So that I just wanted to add that because it seems like maybe some of our parents haven't been through the process and aren't aware of those circumstances. I certainly wasn't before we actually went through the painful process of college applications, so I thought I would share that knowledge with everybody.
Thank you. Okay, we're ready for,
Hi, my name's David Leeson. I just wanted to say I was delighted to see some of the new offerings, in particular AP Physics 2 and AP Pre-Calc. I think that really rounds out the offerings to provide a good grounding for someone going to something physical science-based. And I had some opportunity to interact with Jennifer Merritt. She's amazing, so I know these are going to be great programs. To the point about Algebra 2 honors, and I looked into some of the background of that. This is one of the reasons I'm so happy about pre-calc. What I see being omitted from that, from a normal pathway, is some of the stuff that pertains to linear algebra, which is the rationale for removing those is because those aren't being addressed in the AP Calc modules, and so said, well, we don't need it. But actually, I would say some of that linear algebra is going to be more important for computer scientists and engineers than the calculus. So I wonder if that is the reason that decision was made. But regardless, that's been addressed by offering pre-calc. All the linear algebra is in there, so I think it's an amazing, well-rounded offering. So thank you.
okay. Discussion, comments?
Quick question, so Algebra 2 honors is not weighted this year, but it was weighted last year?
It's weighted this year based off of the communication we got from the UCs near the beginning of February. They're taking the designation off for honors, which means it wouldn't be weighted for next year. We're monitoring. Yeah, everyone's good this year who's in it. That's why counselors are informing them now, like this happened recently. And then again, they're monitoring to see if they can potentially resubmit it, but as of right now, they've moved it off for every high school in California.
Dr. Mayberry, you've given us a great base. We have a much better understanding, I think all of us now, about the process. And I thank you very much for that.
I have a couple of general comments to kind of make. First, I think there's a lot going on, like with the weighting and things like that. And as a senior who's gone through the application process and successfully finished it for a private school, I think definitely what people are saying from the audience, like schools do recalculate your GPA. Like, I know that for a fact. That's a known thing. However, I do think in terms of what Ms. Hornstein had mentioned in terms of scholarships, a lot of these big private schools first, like, you know, some of them don't even offer merit aid. It's straight just if you need based aid. So that's like all 8 Ivies. It's just straight need based aid. It's not any merit aid from the schools. And a lot of these outside scholarships, like that's something I'm heavily invested right now. The cost of my school is like $95K a year. So all these outside scholarships, and a lot of them just take your straight GPA. So I think there's an important balancing act there. It's like, how do you make sure you're not, you're balancing both of those things out nicely. So you're still having the weighted classes, but you're not also, not having them for no reason. I also think, I do think, I agree with another point she made, is that students, like I think we want to think that, students want to take classes that they're interested in, engage in that rigor. But there is also a point where a student's not going to be interested in the class if it's not weighted. So for example, like English 9 honors of the high school, Miss Benson's class, who historically teaches that class, Miss Benson's class, that's not a weighted class of the high school. I think that's fine. I don't have like a personal contention with that, but I just know, some students choose not to take it. It's like, it's not weighted, I'm not giving that GPA boost. But then I think students who are maybe who think a little bit more in the long term, like, okay, I'm learning important skills in that class that are going to correlate to English 10 honors and AP English literature and composition and those kind of things. So that's just something to keep in mind. I also think, I know science is like continuing brought up. I know someone spoke about like science in the crowd. As Kamal said earlier, I completely have great respect, and I think our science department does an amazing job. I mean, Miss Friedman, probably one of the best teachers I've ever had, who's our AP chemistry teacher. But I do agree that there is a fundamental issue with how the science system is set up. We had a couple of colleges come this year to college when they come, they give these rep visits, and so we had NYU's School of Engineering come, and it was a rep from that specific school, so that specific school who read your application, and someone had asked US because they require biology, chemistry, and physics. They require all those three. And so in terms of our high school, the way our system's set up is you'd have to double up on one of the, you'd have to take bio and you'd have to take 2 science classes in 1 year. And that's a really big feat for a lot of our students to undergo. And so the students, and Kate can interject as well, is to still have the IS system there, because it's a great opportunity for students who are not super, who don't want to go the STEM route, have that still there, but allow students their sophomore year at the minimum to engage in one of these AP classes. I mean, we're offering AP Physics 2 now, so it's like, okay, can they take AP Physics 1 their sophomore year, AP Chemistry their sophomore year, go in AP Physics 1 their junior, then AP Physics 2 their senior year. But I think asking students to double up on science classes when we're if we're concerned about student wellness and their health and things like that, I think that's just something to take into account and consider.
Thanks a lot.
I just wanted to add on to the science thing. I myself am not passionate about science at all, but I like the opportunity to take the integrated science classes. You learn a lot in a lot of different subjects, but I do understand, I've talked to counselors outside the district where it's a problem if you don't have bio, chem, and physics. So I totally see how that's a problem as well.
And just wanted to clarify, for those 3 that you described, if you take integrated science 1, 2, and 3, you would meet all 3 of those. So if you take 1 and 2 and you don't have the 3rd one, then you could take the AP equivalent, right? If you're missing the chemistry piece, you could take AP Chem, then you would meet it, right? So if they're requiring all 3, you can balance that between the integrated science 1 and 2, and then whatever your 3rd year is.
My understanding, Dr. Mayberry, and I was understanding, it integrates all 3 of those years together. I think from the college admissions side, from what the admissions office from NYU said, is when they look at your transcript, which is what they're seeing the classes are on, it's they see integrated science 1, and when accounts, I think it was Ms. Rosa, one of the counselors asked, do you guys take integrated science? Because we have students take 1, 2, and 3. Does that fulfill because they have very strict requirements to even apply. Does that fulfill your requirements? And my understanding what he said is that no, we want to see each of those courses taken individually. We don't know what integrated science is when we read your application. So I don't know if there's a way to clarify potentially in the process, hey, these students are still meeting all your requirements. They're just meeting in a non-traditional and maybe even better way, in some cases where they're really having an interdisciplinary approach there. So I don't know.
That's a similar thing, I think at least, last I checked, at least half the high schools also do integrated math, right? The rest of the world does integrated math. We're one of the only countries that still does the algebra, geometry, algebra 2 sequence. But similarly, there's some integration there, and so colleges look at that and they kind of know, okay, behind this is this, right? And so, behind integrated science 1 is more physics, behind integrated science 2 is life science, but if there's a way that we can communicate it, it would be really helpful.
So so I'm wondering then if we are, so we keep coming back to science, so, and I think that seems to be kind of a consistent messaging, wondering if, as we're discussing, maybe what things we might want to bring forward to the next, because I think our next, when do we review, or when do we see when does the curriculum come forward for approval?
It's scheduled for April right now.
So would it be helpful then if we, for just curriculum in general, if we were to look at our process in a way that might allow for by this date, we have the presentation for new concepts, new classes to develop. Then by January, we have, because I see, we've had the curriculum committee every year in January for almost as far as back as I could tell. So that does seem to be a fixed date. But with everything else being kind of so floating, because I know, a couple years ago, we actually had curriculum approval in February. And I think to our guest attorney, whose name I've already forgotten. Guest attorney, or attorney whose name I've already forgotten. I'm so sorry. Estrada, thank you. Ms. Estrada suggested that it's not necessarily best practice to enroll our students in classes that haven't been approved, board approved. So if we were to maybe just in the spirit of best practices, if we maybe had a more linear, specific windows of time, would that be helpful? Would that be hurtful? In the way that we bring it forward now, is that something that if we were to do something more specific time-wise that we could ease into so it's not too disruptive, but it also respects the fact that a best practice would be to have the board at least have seen or acknowledged the curriculum before before students are enrolling? Is that something that we could maybe look at and move forward to the next meeting for the following year? And then my other thought was the honors courses, and I think I think that does require maybe some more investigation on all fronts, because it does fall into the UC Cal system, but we have this whole situation where we go outside of the schools, and while I know they strip stuff out of the GPAs, there's obviously examples where it would be beneficial. And to, the point of linear algebra, that would be a prerequisite to some of our computer science programming classes that we also offer that are AP and advanced, correct? Don't we offer computer science?
There's not, yes, but there's not a prerequisite.
So is that
way.
Is that algebra 2 a prerequisite to that? It's not, even though there's a linear algebra down the road? Okay, that's just linear algebra. Yeah, it's beyond my scope. Okay.
We could go back and look at the timing of the curriculum council and like the flow of it. Like I mentioned earlier, like there's advantages and disadvantages to the time of year, right? As you move it back further, it gives the high school team a little bit less time. They have to kind of push back their planning, so it ends up being almost a year and a half out. But that also, there's advantage that's challenging, right? They don't have as much flexibility. On the other side of that, it's out in front more, right? So those are the things we weigh when we make decisions. So, moving the January one back to October, November, like that's something we could look at. And then,
even if it's that one, or just
as an
adding even a precursor preview, or like that I appreciate that they bring, I don't know where you went. I appreciate that the students are involved in the classroom setting, but I think the overall, if I'm understanding the overall sense, is that to have a broader lens from the parents and students to be able to, because some people may not see it or they weren't in class that day, or, I mean, so is there a way that is it possible to focus on, or is it possible to look at some of these waiting situations before 25, 26, or are we beyond that window of opportunity?
that's based out of our board policy. So we would have to do, there's a process that you have to do for updating a board policy. So we'd have to look into that timing of that and what that would look like. But we could do that in the next week and get back to you. And so, but there's if we're aligning these to what's approved on UCs, right? Then we have to follow that right now.
So we could change the policy so that we not only align with the UCs and Cal States, but that we take into consideration the rigor of the class, the surrounding districts, as well as the equitability for our students to have some of these honors courses weighted. We could look at that policy and adjust that if needed.
It's under the board's purview to adjust all that. We could make every course honors, and then we'd have the highest GPAs for every scholarship, right? So there's lots of options to consider. I think typically you want to have like a reason that says this is why this is this. We can clearly measure this. Or you could honestly make everything honors. There are a couple handful of schools that have done that. They only offer honors and AP courses. So a couple small independent schools do that.
Thank you, Dr. Mayberry.
I don't think it's I think it would be like based on rigor, but I've had, this is probably my 15th year at the high school, and we've been all over the APs and the, do you weight it? And, and I've also been driving the car where I have the kids in the back saying the same thing. Well, doesn't matter, it's not going to be weighted. And at the same time, it's like, well, Johnny's going to be, his GPA is higher than mine because he didn't take the rigorous class and he got a better score than my rigorous class that I tanked. So, it's definitely a conversation that goes around and around. So to your point, so I appreciate that coming forward as well.
And I will say, just like, as an educator of 25 years, like, it breaks my heart to hear kids talking about that. And it happens, right? It's inevitable. There's even if parents and teachers are saying, look, we want you well-rounded, go for your passions, there's still peer interactions, there's all kinds of things that impact that. I will tell you, it breaks my heart because we know in the long run, it's not going to have this significant impact on their life. Sometimes it's likely not going to have a significant impact on where they go to college. And we've seen so many kids have high levels of anxiety and stress related to chasing GPAs, which is not learning. That's not learning, right? And so that part makes me really, again, we have to make decisions that are not going to be perfect for anybody. But I just want to share that, I want kids to follow their passion and know that, whatever college they go to, they're going to find the right fit and go on and have a successful life because we gave them the skills to do that, whether they were in Algebra 2 honors or Algebra 2 or whatever it was. That's ultimately what we want. We don't want them chasing GPAs, and I know it's super hard to do, to not fall into that. But if there's anything we can do to really continue to focus on the balanced student, I highly recommend it.
Clerk Hills, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to say a couple things. I always recommend the book 100 Colleges That Changed Lives because I didn't chase GPAs and somehow I got into college. But no, I wanted to, first of all, just thank you. You started out saying that there's short notice and, we have all the documents and we've read all the documents. And what I found is that oftentimes you read all the documents and then what's happening is different what's in the documents. So I personally really appreciated hearing it directly from you. And you did a great job with short notice and without new documents. You did a fantastic job. So I want to thank you. And I also want to thank Dr. Alleman. I don't know if he's still here, but I really appreciated his participation as well. And I wanted to thank Board Member Morgan for making sure that this happened. When you're on the board, as I'm finding out, you get stopped on the street or you get somebody call you, and just as a matter of your own independent fact-finding, you can hear them out and hear what's on their mind, but then under the bylaw, of course, you refer them to the district, but then sometimes you never find out what happens with the district. So I think that we've all been hearing about curriculum issues. So this is the right way to do this. And so I really appreciate you coming in and everybody coming in on short notice in the rain and all that. So. Sorry. I also wanted to thank the student representatives. Before the comments you made at the end, the comments you made earlier in the process were really helpful and interesting. And I also wanted to repeat my apology that you guys didn't get included in that one meeting that we had. And I was shocked when you weren't there. And so I am just wanted to express my appreciation for you guys.
Yeah, and I just want to thank the board members. All the board members responded. I sent an email and there was a response within 24 hours from every single one saying, we're going to remedy this. We're going to make sure it's not happening again. So it really shows, we're going to adhere to the bylaws. We're going to, do good governance. So that was inspiring. So thank you for that.
To that point, I actually, thank you. I did bring this forward. I am a little black and blue from it, so I hope that this has offered some clarity for some of why this came forward. But I would actually prefer to defer the kudos to our students, because our students are the ones that expressed concern over the process, and they expressed concern over the understanding of the weighting and the unweighting, and should we have honors classes that are more rigorous be weighted or not. And the fact that so many of these questions were coming forward, it motivated me to say, this is what I ran for, was to represent the community voice. And when the students are coming forward with a concern, I think that to be able to offer an environment that is safe, to be able to offer an environment that allows us to have differing of opinions, that can come together to find consensus, I think that is certainly my goal. And I think for students to always feel empowered that it's okay to ask for more information beyond what you might be getting because it's either confusing or because it just doesn't make sense or because you actually have a different perspective. I want that to be what we're creating here, is an environment where the students feel safe that they can come in and say their piece and they can actually have a differing opinion of the adults in the room. And so I want to thank you guys for allowing our students to have that voice and to be able to come forward with a slightly different perspective than what we all might think, and to be able to embrace that and welcome that. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone. We really brought this forth for students because of questions we were getting from students. And I know people thought it should be added to a board meeting, but here we've been an hour and 45 minutes, and our board meetings agendas are really full as it is, and to really give time for this important issue would be really tough. So I appreciate people coming for a special meeting. Thank you. And
do we have any motions that have come out of this that we need to bring forward? Do we need to make a motion to evaluate the curriculum committee, or is that something that can wait until March, one of the other March meetings, or do we need a motion to have the weighting considered prior to the 25-26 school year? Or am I missing anything, or does anybody think there's a motion that we need to bring forward?
We heard that you want us to look at the timing around the curriculum council process and the approval process of looking at some different options that maybe allow it to happen a little bit sooner for a variety of reasons. So we can look at that option and send that to you in a weekly update and say, here's some options, and then and make that adjustment. The existence of it exists in a policy, and it exists in the approval process. Where it lands is not part of any policy. So we can adjust that. That's the interest of the board, consensus and interest of the board. As regards to changing the honors policy, that's in the board policy, right? So we'd want to do that and then work through a board workshop first, and then it goes through first read and second read.
okay, thank you. So we can bring.
We'll bring back the weighting for a board policy as soon as we can. Great, thank you.
Is tomorrow at 5 p.m. for the board to share the qualities they seek in a new superintendent. There's a regular meeting on March 13th, 2025. May I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Thank you, everyone.